There's some beautiful studies now putting EEG systems on all of the students and all of the teachers and showing that their brainwaves actually sync up. When teachers and their students are actually connected and they're in the classroom together, their brains start oscillating together. And during that period that they're actually oscillating together, the students actually learn the information the teacher's actually teaching them. But that synchronization only happens if the teacher's connected to the student, if there's actually a relationship there. The kids that don't have a good relationship with the teacher, they don't ever get into that synchronization and they don't actually learn as well from the teacher.
Hey, you found Ways We Learn, an investigation of how learning happens across all ages and modalities. Let's go learn something. Hi, and welcome back to Ways We Learn. I'm Sean, and I'm here with Brian. And today we're speaking with Mark Williams, who is a neuroscientist, a professor, and an author of the just published book, The Connected Species, which we'll link in the episode notes. When I first spoke with Mark, he hit me with something that has stuck in my head ever since. So this was back in June of 2023, so about 3+ years since COVID started, and about 3.5 years since I had started working remotely full time. And what he said was that online interactions are like fast food, and face-to-face interactions are like home-cooked meals. And my brain just melted a little when he said that, because he's absolutely right. We all know that craving that we have to be with people in person, whether it's for work or for personal connections. And no matter how much we try to make our video conversations satisfy that need for connection, there's just always something missing. And so the way he put it in terms of fast food versus nourishing food was just a perfect analogy. And so Mark's book explains the need for human connection and its implications. And today he's here to discuss with us human connection in general, and then how to apply it in service of learning experiences. So Mark, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to Ways We Learn.
Thank you for having me, Sean.
So let's just get started with your background. What brought you to where you are?
It's a long story, and you might not have time. I actually wasn't someone who enjoyed school. My mother actually had mental health issues, and I grew up in a small country town, and it was high unemployment in the town. There was quite a bit of drug problem, and so I really tried to avoid school as much as I possibly could. Myself and my friends used to go down the lake as much as we could and smoke pot and fish. When I was 16, my principal told me and my father that I'd be dead or in prison by the time I was 25, and then I should get an apprenticeship at the local laboratory. So, it wasn't your usual track to being a professor. It was when I was 25 that two of my friends had drug overdoses, and I decided I wanted to change something. So I went back to TAFE, which would be community schools in the US, to actually get my HSC so that I could sort of get a decent job. And there was a physics teacher there who convinced me that I was more intelligent than I'd ever thought I was, and that I should go to university, which I'd never really thought about. And so he really inspired me, to enroll and to go to university. I got into a Bachelor of Science degree, and I never really looked back from there. I did a double major in psychology and in physiology, which is what got me into the neuroscience. And I think I really did that because I wanted to work out what was going on with my mother, what was going on with my family, what was going on with me, why I was where I was. But I was also really, really always interested in science because I love taking stuff apart, trying to work out how it worked. And me and my friends used to, rebuild our bikes all the time and add extra bits to them and do all those sorts of things. And see if we could get them to go faster or build jumps and all sorts of weird things. And so I'd always been really interested in science and how things work. So I put those two things together, the interest in why we are the way we are with the interest in how things work. And that's neuroscience, right? I've had so many people in my life, teachers and supervisors and professors, who have really seen something in me that I never saw in myself, but it really changed my trajectory and where I was going and what I believed I was capable of by having those people in my life, which is why I'm so passionate about teaching these days, because teachers change lives.
It's fantastic when that can happen, and that doesn't always happen for people, but to have that kind of person who believes in you and to really change your life that way, it's really amazing.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that brings us to, among other things, your book, The Connected Species. And so can you give us, and congratulations, by the way, on the publishing, can you give us just a brief overview of the thesis of the book?
Yeah, so it's based on a lot of my previous research, but of course, the whole thousands of other amazing researchers as well, their work. But it's the idea that we as a species aren't the strongest species around, and we're not the fastest species around, and we don't have the largest brain of all the species. But we've become the alpha species on this planet Earth, and we've taken over every and nook and cranny of this Earth due to the fact that we're connected, due to the fact that we actually collaborate with each other. And our driving force and our pure nature is actually to collaborate and to empathize and to be connected, to actually work with each other. And we are the only species on planet Earth that actually connects across groups. So you can think of bees, for example. They have amazing hives and they have amazing communities within that, and they all do their special jobs and everything else. But one beehive will never tell another beehive that there's some cool, flowers over there that we didn't get to pollinate, or would you like some extra honey? And you can give us some honey later on when we need it. We are the only species that does that. We're the only species that actually connects across groups and actually works across groups and collaborates across groups. And so to do that, we had to evolve this amazing, complex, large brain relative to our body size, which allows us to understand, remember who people are, understand who they are, understand our connection to them, and then understand how they're feeling, how they're thinking, understand group dynamics as well. So it's an amazing complex thing that we're able to do. And it is the best thing we can actually do. So actually sitting down with someone face to face and communicating with them, someone you trust, is better for your mental health than anything else you can actually do. It's better than any drug that's on the market. Pharmaceutical companies get all upset by that idea. But there isn't a drug which is actually as good for your mental health as actually sitting down and chatting to someone. So we need to get back to that, and we need to actually realize that we're all part of this huge, big species that has enabled us, and everyone being connected has enabled us to get to where we are. And so we need to do more of that to move to the next level. And I think we can. I think we're just at a bit of a crossroads at the moment.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me. So one of the projects that I've worked on in the past was the school had an online school and they had an in-person school. And we were continuously having trouble getting some of the same results out of the online program. And at one point we started breaking it down and we said, what are we doing in person that we're not able to do online? Is there something in the educational aspects of it? And when we looked at the two of them, it was pretty one for one. Most of the things that you could do in person that you could do online. And someone just said at one point, it just doesn't feel the same. What is that? Like, right? So that's like the bridge you're talking about, right? Where is this gap? Because I've seen it, I've felt it, I've seen it in the data. I'd love to have a name for it.
So yeah, there's a couple of things that happen when we meet on face to face that can't happen when we meet online, and makes it really difficult. So number one thing, and the most important thing for us as humans and as mammals, is the first thing we do when we meet up with someone is we touch them. And so when you actually touch someone, there's seed fibers in our skin, which are there just for touch, and they're not there for anything else. So when you touch someone, these seed fibers activate, and that activates an area of our brain which releases oxytocin. And oxytocin makes us more willing to actually connect with the person. It makes us trust that person. And we don't get that when we're online. And of course, in all societies, we have some way of appropriately touching each other when we actually meet. So in stoic societies like ours, we shake hands. And even the Inuits will actually rub noses because it's the only part of their body that's actually showing. And so they'll get those C fibers active by rubbing each other's nose. And therefore, they'll get that oxytocin release so that they'll actually feel more connected to the person and they'll actually trust them more. So that's the first thing that happens. Second, there's a body language. So when we're online, we only see people from the shoulders up. So you don't actually get the body language. Now, we have a whole mirror neuron system, which activates when we're actually seeing somebody, their whole body. And that actually activates the same motor plan in us so that we can then understand how that person's feeling. So if that person's hunched over, our body and our motor plan does the same thing so that we understand, oh, that person's feeling a little bit depressed now. And so we understand and we empathize with the person better because we can actually see how they're actually feeling. Now, of course, that means that those feelings are contagious. We actually have the same feeling as the other person. So if a teacher walks into the room and they're feeling really good and they're getting into the whole classroom and everything else, all the students in the classroom, their motor plans will activate in the same way and they'll actually feel the same. So they'll get that serotonin released as a result of that, which is really important again for them feeling motivated and activating areas of the brain which are involved in learning and connecting with the teacher. So they get the oxytocin, they get serotonin. You also get a whole bunch of endorphins released as well because of the fact that you're in the same room as someone and therefore you feel safer, because we feel safe when we're around people that we actually trust. It goes back millions of years, and that's why we love being in groups and we love being around people we feel safe with. So if you feel safe with your teacher, then you're going to have a whole bunch of really important neurotransmitters released, which is going to make you less stressed and more engaged in whatever it is that the teacher or whoever it happens to be actually wants to tell you about. Also, eye gaze. So eye gaze is a big problem when we're online. So we don't know where the other person's actually looking. An important part of the learning process is the teacher will actually, or somebody, whoever you're talking to, will look at something and you understand that they're actually referring to that when they're actually looking at that. But we can't get that when we're online, because I have no idea what you guys are actually looking at. And you have no idea what I'm actually looking at if I look over there. So we don't get any of that information as well, which is all automatic. There's also a whole bunch of problems with where people put their cameras, because often people, I'll pick on you, Brian, people will put their cameras down low. And if the camera's down low, then it actually looks as though you're standing over the person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually an aggressive mood. And so, yeah, so we actually need to make sure our cameras are eye level like Sean's got his, or above eye level, because then it looks as though you're actually at the same level of them, or you're underneath them. So that's the right eye level. But most people have their short, Brian's now going to move his camera.
Literally reorganizing
moving his camera as he's doing this. Yeah, so if you've got your camera low, then you're actually looking down at the person, and that's an aggressive stance from an evolutionary point of view. So our brains automatically say that's aggressive. So those are a few. There's other ways, there's other aspects to it as well, which also make it difficult to actually connect. But we know there's some beautiful studies now with teachers and students putting EEG systems on all of the students and all of the teachers, and showing that the students who are connected to the teachers, their brainwaves actually sync up. So our brains oscillate all the time. But when teachers and the students are actually connected and they're in the classroom together, their brains start oscillating together. And during that period that they're actually oscillating together, the students actually learn the information the teacher's actually teaching them. But that synchronization only happens if the teacher's connected to the student, if there's actually a relationship there. The kids that don't have a good relationship with the teacher, they don't ever get into that synchronization, and they don't actually learn as well from the teacher. So it's so important that we actually have that relationship, and we create that relationship through all those things, through the oxytocin, through the serotonin. Whereas when we're online, we only get dopamine, because we get a hit of dopamine because we see a face, but we don't actually get anything else. And dopamine's not very good for connection, and it actually just gives us this really short hit like we get when we win gambling or we win a prize or do those sorts of things. But it's not very sustaining, not very good for us. So those are a few of them, Brian. I can keep going, but I'll leave it at those few things. But there's a whole bunch of neurotransmitters.
I'm willing to let you keep going, sir. I'm willing to hear. I'm actually like, well, one of the things that I'm kind of fascinated by, and aside from touch, which in and of itself is fascinating to think about, but the other things that you kind of mentioned were very visual. And the thing that's interesting to me is I talked to an online teacher who's been teaching online for a long time, and they said to me that it's much more of an auditory phenomenon than it is a visual phenomenon. They can't look out over the class and see who's paying attention, right? And they have to kind of listen into the person's voice to understand how they're feeling. So that's kind of fascinating to me. The question I have, though, and it's sad that Joe's not here because he is the teacher relationship guy, but I was talking to a principal not too long ago, and they said one of the things that makes in-person education amazing is that the teacher can form a relationship with the student and use that relationship to motivate the student. So the relationship comes from these in-person chemical releases. The chemical releases give us trust, they give us bonding, and then the teacher can utilize that relationship in order to inspire the student, motivate the student. Is that sort of the part of the gist of what you're saying as well? And is there any nuances in there?
But there is a whole bunch of nuances. So you've got to actually create that relationship between the two. And that requires a teacher to actually be vulnerable so that the student can actually see that the teacher is actually a person and they're actually somebody who actually cares about them. Because what you need to do is create an environment where the student actually feels as though they're part of your in-group as a teacher. So you're all part of the one in-group, because we know people don't learn from people who aren't in their in-group, and we actually hear people differently if you're not part of their in-group. You literally hear things differently. And we perceive facial expressions differently based on whether or not we like the person or not, or whether we actually are connected to the person. So if you are connected with someone and they're part of your in-group, you see a happy face as a happy face, and you get all these neurotransmitters that make you feel happy as well. So that's contagious. If someone smiles and you don't see them as part of your in-group, you actually see it as a smirk, and your brain responds to it as though they're actually angry. So if you're not connected with your teacher and they come in smiling, you're going to process that like they're actually angry, and you're going to actually have your physiological response, that is your fight or flight response, will go off. So you've got to have that connection with them. Otherwise, they're not going to hear what you say the same way. They're not going to see you in the same way. We actually find people who are in our in-group are also more attractive. So we're actually more willing to actually listen to them from that point of view as well. But you're going to perceive their facial expressions and their body language differently. And so therefore you're not going to be willing to listen to them. And we know that's true. There's lots of evidence now that's so important for us to actually learn from them, which makes sense because we actually learn really quickly and we learn really easily from somebody else. And so we don't want to learn from people who aren't part of our in-group, because they might be teaching us something that we can't trust, that isn't going to be good. So we've evolved this really neat mechanism to go, these are the people I'm willing to learn from, and these are the people that are okay to learn from. And anybody over here aren't people. They're people that I can't trust, and therefore I'm not going to learn from. And so you don't learn from those people.
Is that in-group favoritism? Is that what that's called? Is that the phenomenon?
Yeah, in-group versus out-group perception, yeah. And it is hardwired within us, and we need to realize it. But the important thing is that changes, right? Our in-group actually changes based on what our situation and how we're perceiving the world. So those teachers that can create a classroom where everybody feels as though they're part of that classroom and they're part of that in-group and they're all getting along. All those students, and I'm sure you both know, right? All those students learn and they're all happy to be there. But if you've got an environment where the students don't actually feel as though they're part of that classroom, and I work with a lot of teachers who have these environments where, there's little groups, there's little pockets of kids who don't feel as though they're part of their own little group, right? And so they'll learn from each other, but they won't learn from the teacher and won't learn from the class.
Where does this break down in person? Is it the ability to hold a crowd, or does it actually break down at like 50 people? Once the class size is bigger than 50 people, it's really hard to touch everybody. So you don't get the oxytocin. I mean, it's not actually that hard to touch everybody, but in a reasonable way to touch them all, Is there like a scale cap on this? Like how do you think about that?
Yeah, I used to run a neuroscience course that had 1,000 students. So yeah, I know what you mean. It's sometimes hard to actually get around and actually know every person's name and actually relate to each of them. It depends. Yeah, there is a big difference in how some people can actually relate to the whole class and others can't. And there are tricks, tricks, I suppose you call them, that you can play to actually have that working better or not working as well. I see a lot of lecturers particularly will come into the class and they'll just go, my name's blah, this is what I do, these are the rules of the class, this is what you're expected to do this semester, and then go straight into it, right? You're not making a connection there with the vast majority of the students. There are going to be students there that are really keen on that topic and that so therefore are going to connect to you no matter what you actually do. You could scream at them and they'd still probably connect to you because they're really keen to learn. But then the majority of students aren't going to connect to you. So telling stories to begin with, going in there and saying, hey, I'm so, and this is why I'm really passionate about this. And so I talk to a lot of teachers. I say you've got to spend the first week getting to know your students, getting to know all your students, getting to know them on a real level before you start any curriculum. With a lecturer, I say the first lecture should be you getting to know your students, or your students getting to know you, if you've got a large classroom. So actually going through some stuff about you, being vulnerable about who you are. I always talk about the fact that I love surfing. I always talk about some silly things I've done. I talk about the fact that I've got teenage kids, and so therefore I can relate to the younger kids, and which I can't really, and I'll say some stupid jokes and all that sort of stuff to get them laughing, get them involved.
I can't either, for what it's worth.
Get them to relate to you on some level, So then you can start teaching them. You can do it at any level. And as you said, there's some amazing people that can just walk into a class or walk onto a stage and just capture everyone immediately. But you'll notice they usually tell a story, or like Barack Obama, we all know his history, and we know his story, and we know the amazing things that he was able to do. So therefore, we already have that connection. And so if we're unknown, then we've got to create that connection through some sort of story and through a bit of vulnerability.
This is incredible.
Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I want to go back to a couple things. One is you mentioned that, and I never knew this, that in a live setting where the lecturer or the instructor, whoever, is making really good connections with the students, that the brainwaves actually sync, and which is incredible. And my question is, has that ever been studied virtually in an online setting? Because it seems like if it hasn't, there's my PhD research.
Yeah, no, it hasn't. No, you're right. It hasn't. It would be awesome. And there is your PhD research.
That sounds amazing. That's so interesting.
That would be fascinating. You stick everyone into a different little booth and
and really see whether you can make the same kind of connection. Because I've had experiences.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've had experiences in online classes where whether I'm in the class or observing the class, observing the teachers, I can see that there's a real connection being made. But I'm really curious now whether it's at the same kind of level that you're describing, because it is missing a lot of those things. You're not in the same place. You can't really tell what someone's looking at. I mean, I'm looking at you while we're speaking, but it's because I've placed your image right below the camera so I can see you and it looks like I'm looking at you. I could just as well have my email open and be doing email in the background and it would look like I'm looking at the camera. But it's the camera placement thing. But then the brainwaves thing is amazing. And I'm just so curious whether the same phenomenon would happen in a virtual setting with good connection between teacher and student that would in person.
I agree completely. And I often, when I talk to people about, because at the university, I'm back teaching this semester. They dragged me back. They can't live without me. I'm back just for this semester to run 2 third-year courses. And a lot of them, they're hybrid, of course, now because post-COVID. And so the students can choose to either come in or not come in. They have to come in for the labs, but they don't have to come in for the lectures. But I say to them, come to the first lecture so that we can get to know each other first. And then if you have to, then watch the rest of them online so that we can at least have that first contact to actually make that relationship. But also, Brian was saying before that you can't, if you've got 1,000 students, you can't actually touch them all to get the oxytocin going. But you don't you don't have to touch them. You can get them to touch each other so that you can get them all to turn to each other and shake hands. It's not because of your touch that necessarily release. You don't have to touch them to get the oxytocin flowing. You can get them to touch each other, and that will get the oxytocin in an appropriate way. Of course, you don't want them inappropriately touching each other, although most of them do.
Family show.
But yeah, so you can just say, turn around to the person beside you and shake their hands and introduce yourself to them. That'll get the oxytocin flowing, which means that they'll get more connected to you as well. So you can do little tricks like that.
This phenomenon explains so many things, right? The touching and the being person. This explains like why church is so powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was
this is why politicians go out and touch everybody.
Shake your hand and grab your elbow.
Shake your hands, kiss babies. Yeah, pull you in close,
Mm-hmm. This is so interesting because the touch thing is, I know that when COVID started and everyone was trying to avoid shaking hands, it felt so strange and I missed it. I found myself missing it and I kind of got used to it and okay, it's the new normal and everything. But now you've got me thinking, I'm actually helping design a class for college students where they work with a partner. And it's such a perfect opportunity that I'm now thinking about to go, okay, when you meet your partner, shake their hand. And it's that little tiny thing that just makes such a difference. This is fascinating to learn about.
Actually, that's a curious question that actually can maybe bridge us into online schools. What is the result of not having these things? There's a lot of online educational schools. A lot of stuff is happening online now. What are the downsides of that? And if you can think about it, what are the positives?
Yeah, I mean, the positives, obviously, people who remote communities, people who don't have the physical health to actually go to classes, but who disabilities, these things. I think it's amazing for those individuals who wouldn't have the opportunity to do these classes and so on. And I think that's a really cool aspect to it, which I think we need to be aware of. But it does, we know that just being on a screen is actually more stressful than not being on a screen. So just being on a screen actually increases stress levels, which is not great for learning. At their cortisol levels, they've looked at cortisol levels and shown cortisol level goes up. We also know that just reading from a screen, you don't remember the information as well as if you actually read it from a piece of paper. So there's been thousands of studies now where they've given everyone from preschool kids all the way through to senior citizens either a PDF or the information on a tablet or on a computer or on a laptop, and giving them the same amount of time to read it and then giving them a test. And they show that the people who learn it on a piece of paper actually perform 10 to 20% better than those that actually learn it on the screen. When people learn online, for example, if you get them if they've got a printer to print stuff out and then read it on paper, they'll actually remember it and understand it and retain it better. So that's some of the negatives associated with it. Also, the connection, as we've talked about, doesn't work as well. So as I said, I like to get my students to at least come in for the first day or a first session so that we can actually make a connection. And then once you've got the connection, it's much easier to sustain that connection online, but you don't get that same connection you would otherwise. I think having kids or teens or adults actually do the work online in groups, if you can. There's a couple of remote universities that I've worked with here in Australia. And so they are in small country towns and they're set up so that the students can come onto campus there and then they can have a lecturer who's in the big city who's actually then working with them. But they'll have 2 or 3 people on a computer in the one little, room. So then they get the connection with each other. So then they feel more connected from that point of view. And then you can get them to shake each other's hands and do these things. So there's ways of tweaking it to actually make it better. But I don't think we've been thinking about a lot of those ways of doing it, which I think are really cool. You've got to also get them to turn off all their notifications, because we know that the notifications, every time a notification goes off, we lose the last 90 seconds of what we were doing because of our working memory. So our working memory is really limited, and because of our attention mechanisms, if something beeps or something buzzes or something jumps up and down, or their phones go off or their phones beep or buzz or anything like that, they lose the last 90 seconds of what they were just doing, but they don't realize they lose the last 90 seconds of what they were doing. So if they're trying to listen to your lecture or whatever, and that every time that happens, they lose time and they lose that information. So you've got to make sure that they get rid of all of those things, which a lot of students tend to have a lot of resentment.
When we talked, you told me about a teacher who actually did a study on that. Can you share that? Because it was kind of jaw-dropping.
Yeah, so he had a class of 25, 30 students, and he was actually a statistician teaching the high school students stats. And he got all of the students to have their phones and then just count the number of beeps or buzzes or whatever they got on their phones during the class. So then they could look at the impact of all of that on the class. And there was like over 1,000 from memory. It was over 1,000 like beeps and buzzes on all of their phones during that 50-minute class across the whole class. And then of course when you take the 90 seconds for each of those buzzes and beeps, it's several days they lost across the class, just in one class, because of those interruptions.
You had told me that they were losing 7 hours of productivity every hour.
It was a ridiculous amount of time, which just shocked the students, right? And shocked them into actually some of them doing something about it, probably not all.
I was going to say, did they actually change the result? It sounds like maybe, or at least in the moment. But so then what do we do with this knowledge, right? Because the cat's out of the bag. We're not going back to just in-person meetings, probably. How do we deal with, say, a learning scenario that really is purely virtual, that you don't have the option for people to necessarily be in the same place at the same time? You don't have the option for this to be a live experience. Is that just doomed to fail?
It's not going to be as simple a process as doing it face to face. So if we do it face to face, you're going to get that extra bonus of having those extra neurotransmitters. It's just going to be a harder slog to do it online. And I think we all know that, right? When you're actually trying to learn anything online, it is harder work to do it that way. And so students we're just going to have to realize that a course that might take 20 hours is probably going to take 30 hours if you're doing it online. And so you're going to have to go through stuff slower. You're going to have to give them a lot more reading to do and give them a lot more feedback on that and do a lot more error correction and all those things and consolidation of the information. And so we just got to realize that the information is not going to be transferred to long-term memory as easily in that environment. And so therefore it's just going to take a little bit longer to do that. But I mean, you can still learn online. I'm not saying you can't learn online. It isn't as easy as it is if you've got a teacher standing in front of you who's super motivated to connect with you and you have a relationship with them. That's the best way to learn.
Do you think that the key is obviously there's the face-to-face, the touch, the shared space, all of that. But if you're unable to do that, is that something that the teacher of a purely online class can actually accomplish? And is it just a matter of going at it longer? Is it a matter of doing things differently? Are there other tricks? How could they accomplish the same kind of thing given more time potentially?
Yeah. So one would be to spend some time connecting with them, just as you would in class. I think a lot of online sessions, they don't have that, hey, let's get to know each other,
Right.
and the teacher being vulnerable and spending time actually getting to know the students. I think a lot of teachers don't spend enough time doing that. So doing that is going to add to that and giving you the opportunity to do that and to move around the class. I would say meet with each student online by themselves, because if you're in a class where you've got multiple faces all looking at each other, that's a really weird environment for our brains, and our
Right.
brains are on high alert when you do that. If you do it just one-on-one, so if you meet with each student, if you can, I imagine some classes obviously would be too big, but if you can meet with each student just for 15 minutes one-on-one before the classes start, so you can get to know each of them and actually start that relationship just in a very one-on-one, we're talking to each other, we're getting to know each other, let's have a chat about who I am and who you are and what you want to get out of this. That would be really awesome, and that would actually create a really good environment. So that then when you get into this classroom where there's all these faces and this weird environment where everyone's feeling anxious and so on, you're already connected to it. They all know you and you know them. So that would help as well to create those connections. So those are a few things that you could do if it was purely online. It just takes as I said, a little bit more effort.
Yeah, well, and also more time, because when you have that online class, often the expectation from the institution is that it's going to take the same amount of time as an in-person class because it's the same amount of material and it's the same number of meetings and all of that stuff. And you're saying, no, you actually have to back up a bit and really focus on making the connection between teachers and students that then fuels the motivation for the student to want to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know, dropout in online courses is much higher than
Much
these face-to-face courses,
Yeah.
right? And that's got a lot to do with the fact that they don't feel connected to
It's
the
dehumanizing.
teacher and
Yeah.
connected to the university. Yeah. And the university as well. Just being at the university and meeting people and touching people and
Yeah.
going for a beer with people and going for coffee with people and all of that really creates that whole feeling around, this is my university and this is something that I'm proud of and
Yeah.
I'm involved in and I want to learn from and I want to keep in touch with and so on.
Well, and also
that you
the
don't get
trust.
online.
Yeah, the trust that you're talking about.
The trust.
And then I'm thinking also,
Yeah.
you mentioned that it's, and I completely share this experience, that it's overwhelming to jump into an online course and you have this sort of, what was it, Hollywood Squares times 10 on your screen of all of these faces that you're kind of scanning around and trying to find them all. And I'm wondering if there are technological solutions to this also, because when you're in a lecture hall, you have these people around you, but you're focused on one face at a time. You're not spending, you can't see me if you're just listening to this, but you're not spending your time spinning and looking at all the different faces in the room. And I wonder if part of the answer here is actually guiding the students towards a more positive way to use a video call. Turn off the grid, make it so that you just see the speaker.
Yeah, having it set up so that it can only do speaker view is really important, because if you've got all those faces in front of you. It's like you're presenting, and students aren't used to that situation at all, right? We as teachers are used to standing in front of a class where everyone's staring at us,
Right.
but students aren't. But when you have it where there's that whole grid of faces, every student feels as though they're standing in front of the class and on display, and that's just weird. And our brains are just on high alert because we've got 20 people all staring at us. And those 20 people are staring at everybody, which is a really weird situation to be in. And so we need to stop that. Yeah. And so having it on speaker view, which most platforms will now do, that's a good way to actually get around that and get all your students to make sure they have it in that situation. So they're just looking at one person rather than having a whole bunch of people staring at them the whole time and making them feel really awkward. Because most people don't like presenting, right? And you feel as though you're presenting when you're in that situation because you've got 20 people looking at you.
Right.
So, unfortunately for all of us, I have 2,000 questions, but I think I can hit. I think I can hit a lot of them by. Let's say I ran an online school, and I came to you as an advisor for. Okay, how do I solve for a lot of these problems in my online school? My very first question, and I'd like to stay under this hypothetical for a while. Very first question is, how much in-person time is the minimum effective dose? It sounds like what you said earlier on is, you can get everybody together up front, and then you build the connection, and then it's okay to meet online. So how should I think? It's almost like a workout cadence. How often should we think about getting together in person in order to keep the connections, right? Because what you're not saying, hey, don't do away with online altogether, but what you're saying is, look, the human aspects of this and touching each other is really important. Man, that came off wrong.
Family show.
Appropriate.
Yeah,
appropriate.
I'm not long for this one. We all know that. But what is the minimum effective dose? Like, how should we think about getting together these days?
It depends on the individuals themselves. But once a week, I would say would be a minimum to actually reset, to actually get that going. If you're working in an environment where you need to have a lot of trust between individuals, so it's a really innovative, creative environment where you need to trust each other and you need to be making mistakes constantly, you need to be in that environment where you have a lot of psychological safety, then you probably want to be more than once a week because you want to keep reinforcing that we're all mates and we're all trust each other and we all believe in what we're doing and so on. And that's hard to establish online, much easier to establish face-to-face. So if you're in an environment where it's just that you need to collaborate occasionally together and you're mainly working independently, but you want to have a relationship with everyone so everyone feels as though they're part of it, then once a week would be fine for those meetups. I work with several companies that went online during COVID, and then after COVID, they had a lot of trouble getting employees to actually come back because they didn't want to. But then those huge, turnover rates and all sorts of things associated with that, and mental health issues with a lot of the employees because they've now got social anxiety and all these sorts of things. So working through actually getting people back, and also it depends on the size of the company. So I also worked with a couple of big companies where they were going, everyone's got to come back in on a Monday, or everyone's got to come back in on a Friday. But then it was like that caused huge anxiety for a lot of people because they'd all of a sudden, because of COVID and because of neural adaptation that happened during COVID, they had social anxiety. And then all of a sudden they were told, you got to go back into work when everybody's going to be there. And that caused a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. So we're like, hang on, split it up. So the groups come in each day, so that they're smaller groups that are coming in each day so that they'll actually feel more comfortable in that. But set it up so that the groups that actually have to work together would come in each of those days so that they can actually then connect to each other so that they'll work with each other better. So, yeah, it depends on all those things, what you're actually doing, who the individuals are, what sort of company you're working in. But at least once a week, I would say you should be getting together with some of your colleagues.
Staying with this online school and that was awesome, by the way. Staying with this online school analogy, if the teacher was online, but maybe the students were together in person multiple days a week, what would some of the effects of that be? Would there be trade-offs with that? Would you recommend that?
Yeah, that could work. That could work really well if the teacher was good at least connecting with a couple of those students, because then those students connect with the other students, and so they can then get a connection going across that. And so what that teacher would need to be really careful of, that little group that are meeting and she or he is by themselves, that they don't form an in-group of their own without her in it. And so she or he would have to make sure that she at least got a couple of those on her side on a regular basis. And then that would work really well, because obviously they're all going to establish this really nice in-group of their own. But yeah, the teacher would just need to make sure that they don't become an outsider of that group. And of course, doing the stuff that we've been talking about. So meeting with a couple of them face to face, or that would enable her to say meet with one of them each week face to face, just one on one, and then have the rest of them meeting together for the actual class, and so she could keep that connection with all of them through that connection with each individual on a weekly basis. Yeah.
One thing that I hear a lot from online schools is they have a camera on, camera off problem. And it makes sense in light of what you said earlier, where you feel like everybody's watching you because you're in that grid. But this is like a common thing with online schools. How would you recommend they set policy around camera on, camera off?
I would have periods where you have to have the camera on. So periods where you're actually doing feedback work, where you're interacting with the students and actually trying to get feedback and trying to get them to answer questions and you respond. And then have periods where they're doing their own work and they can turn the camera off if they wish, to do their own work or to watch videos. So another thing that I recommend is that you don't have long periods of time where a teacher is just teaching online, as in a lecture situation, but rather you have those presentation periods recorded. And so the students can actually watch those whenever they want to watch those. And then any time that you're online with the students, that's an interactive process. That's a process where you're actually chatting to the students, you're getting feedback, you're actually teaching them what was wrong and what was right, and you're getting questions and answers and doing the process of actually teaching the real teaching, not the lecture. But if you think about it from a university point of view, the lecture should be recorded so they can look at it anytime they want. So it's a truly right online thing, so that they can choose when they actually look at that. They've got to look at it when they want to, and then they can rewind and go back and do all those things if they want to. And then you only do the face-to-face stuff when you're actually doing the teaching. So the tutorial, where you're actually going through questions and going through answers, and you're getting feedback from them as to what's actually working and what's not working. It also means that the time that they're online talking to you is a time when you can actually get a bit of interaction going, and you can actually have discussions going, and you can get more of a connection going.
So we just got a neuroscientific justification for flipped classroom.
Yeah. Even in an organization, so you were talking about work. In work, if you're doing hybrid, you should never do a presentation at a meeting, right? You should record the presentation and send it out a day before, and they can look at it whenever they want to. And then meetings should always be quick and brief, because you don't want to be having long meetings online, and they should be all around questions about the presentation that everyone watched yesterday.
I have one last question, and if I don't ask this, my brain's going to explode, because I'll be thinking about it and asking ChatGPT what the answer is. You said being on screens is stressful. It raises cortisol, right? And you can't you have trouble remembering what you read online as well. You mentioned. What is the causal mechanism of that? Is it like the light is like the screen light is overstimulating the suprachiasmatic nucleus? Should we all like be looking at orange hue all day long? What is it? Why is the screen doing that to us?
Yeah, so there's two questions there, so I'm going to answer two of them separately. The first one is just simply the stress levels, and the stress levels is yes, we've got blue light which is coming in, and blue light is in the sun and everything, but blue light it scatters really easily, and so when it comes from the sun, it starts scattering, so it doesn't go straight into your retina and into the back of your eye. Whereas when we're on a screen, the blue light is coming straight from the screen, so there's not as much time for it to actually scatter. So it goes into our retina and goes onto our fovea, and therefore it causes activation in our retina, which then causes more activation in our brain, which isn't actually very good for us, because we're not used to it, because the blue light coming from the sun, we haven't got into our retina. And so our lens actually isn't set up to actually filter blue light, but we're getting all this blue light, and the blue light causes an increase in stress in individuals. And so therefore, we have trouble sleeping at night because of that blue light, but also it increases your stress levels when you're online. The other thing is, it's all the stuff that we do online. So when you are online, you do a whole bunch of other stuff, especially teenagers and young 20-year-olds do a lot of stuff online these days, such as look at social media and TikTok and all these things. Plus they have their emails, plus they have their fights with boyfriends or girlfriends, plus all these things online. And all those things are associated with being on this screen, being on this computer, or being on this laptop. And so when they're on the laptop, automatically your brain remembers all the stuff in your subconscious area that you've done online and you've been doing online. And you think about, oh, I've got to check that email, or I've got to check my Facebook post that got lots of likes, or I've got to check so-and-so who did such and such, and she responded to that comment that I put. All of that stuff's going on in your brain when you're online, as well as just that I'm trying to remember this stuff that I'm actually doing. That all increases your stress level. So especially teenagers, but all of us, as soon as we open our laptop, our stress levels increase because of all the stuff that we normally do on that laptop or that computer or whatever. Having a different computer or whatever when you're actually learning compared to when you're doing all that other stuff can actually improve that. So if you have, this is my learning laptop and all I do on this is my classes and I don't have any emails or any of that stuff on here, that can actually improve your learning, because when you open that, you're in learning mode rather than being in all these other modes.
Wow. Online schools should send students laptops that are set up only for learning.
And don't have any access to anything else on those. Yeah. And so they can't.
That's a very interesting idea, Mark.
Thank you. And then you were also talking about actually remembering when you're online. So remembering stuff that you're actually reading. So we've known for many years. So when we actually read stuff in a textbook or in a book or whatever, we don't remember the actual facts. What we tend to remember is where we were reading the facts. So we use what we call links and anchors. So you remember that you read this bit here because there was a figure there, or it was on the left side of the page or the right side of the page, or it was just after I turned the page from the first chapter and all those things, which is why in textbooks we always have lots of inserts and lots of figures and lots of all these things, because we know all of those things are linked to our knowledge of what we're actually reading and what we're learning, and that's how we remember information. When you read online, it's usually a PDF or it's a website, and it just scrolls up and down. So you don't have all those links and anchors associated with actually what you're learning and where the paragraphs actually are. So you don't get those links and anchors, so you don't remember it as well when you're scrolling online as you do when you're actually on. So if you can set up a situation where it's more like a book where it flips from one to another and you have all those important little inserts and figures and stuff as it goes from one to another, you get improved memory when you do it like that rather than doing it as a scrolling thing, which is the way PDFs and everything run. The other thing is we don't remember the information as well when we read it online because we think we have access to it later on. There's been some beautiful studies with kids where they've got the kids in front of a window and they've had actors in the back behind the window. And they've told the kids, this is a window and there's actors there and we want you to watch them. And then they've tested what they remember. Or they've said, this is a screen and we're going to show you a video. And it's actually both cases got actors and both cases exactly the same. But this is a video and you're going to watch this video of these people doing this stuff. And then we're going to ask you questions. And if they're told it's actually a screen rather than a window, the kids remember about 20% less of what actually happens because of the fact that they think it's a screen. Yeah. And so therefore it's online and we can look at it anytime and we don't actually have to remember it.
That's fascinating. And that actually got me thinking because when I did my master's I started in 2009. And so I was doing a lot of stuff both in books and in PDFs. And it was sort of at that transition point where I think a lot of people were moving towards more online learning. And I found that I'm trying to sort of make sense of what you're saying, because on the one hand, you're talking about memory from learning the material the first time, right? So reading it in a book, and it's that thing where you've got the book and you're flipping through and you're like, I know it was at about this place in the book and it was on the right side of the page near the top and flip. Okay, here it is.
Exactly.
Versus the infinite scroll of, I have no idea where the scroll bar was. The flip side to that I found though, is that number one, you can mark things up if you edit a PDF, or if that was the way that I typically did it, is I would take a PDF if it was a web page, and then I would use the markup and highlight and write notes, or even just highlight so that I could actually find things again. And you've got that, and then you've got search, versus in a book where you're searching is literally flipping through it. You're searching for a word or a phrase or something in text, and it's instantly going to drop you there. And so I think the distinction you're making is the transcoding to memory, as opposed to being able to find the information. It's putting the information in your head, where
Yes.
where the online learning is more, it's almost treated more as a reference. I can always go back to the PDF. I can always go back to the video. I can find the right spot in the video and I can learn it again, as opposed to if I'm learning it from a book, it's going to make it more likely to encode in long-term memory. Is that what you're getting?
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
You explained that extremely well. I should have just let you explain that.
No, I'm glad you did, because I was this whole time through, I've been going, man, I love learning from, I enjoy both books and online learning, but I treat them very differently. And it really is that the digital stuff is more of a reference for me. And I'm very agile at going back and finding information, but you're right. It's not necessarily there. I have to use it as the reference. And that, I think, is the distinction that you're making, which is a really good one.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Beautiful.
All right. Again, the cat's out of the bag. We do have this online world that we're all living in. So next time anybody who's listening to this is in a video call, whether it's a class, whether it's a call with their parents or a friend or a business connection or a meeting or something like that, we're not in a physical location. We can't shake hands. We don't have necessarily eye contact. What's something that we can do to really enhance the connection with the other person or people at the other end of the line?
One thing is actually stopping ourselves from talking straight away. So one thing, we're all busy these days, and so we're all trying to get our information to the other person as quickly as we can. And we all have stuff that we want to tell the other person, which means these days we don't have any gaps. We're not comfortable with having silence, and especially not comfortable with having silence online. But silence tells the other person, I'm actually appreciating what you're having to say, and I'm actually listening to you. Because if someone's speaking to you and then you speak as soon as they stop talking, you didn't listen to what they've had to say, because you can't actually have listened if you started speaking as soon as they stopped, right? You've got to have a little gap in between where you actually process what they've said and then work out how you're going to respond to that. So if you speak straight away, you've actually been thinking, this is what I'm going to tell them while they're talking to you. And then as soon as they're finished, you'll tell them what you want to tell them rather than actually listen to what they have to say. We need to have those little gaps because it tells the person who's talking, who's just finished talking, I actually have listened to you and I'm thinking about what you had to say. And now I'm going to respond to it. So you get that connection. It's a really important connection we get. But yeah, we need to spend more time with silence, especially online, because online we all feel as though we've got to get our thing in, and especially if there's more than two people on the screen, we all feel as though if we don't jump in, then we're not going to get an opportunity. And especially because of the eye gaze, right? Normally when you're sitting in a group of 3 or 4 people, eye gaze will tell you that person wants to talk next, and you don't get that online, so it's really confusing as to who should go next. But yeah, we need to have those gaps, just allow things to be silent for a little while so that you're saying to whoever you're talking to, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about what you have to say, and then I'm going to respond to what you said, rather than just telling you what I want to tell you so I can get off online, off this call and get into the next call or whatever it happens to be.
I love that.
And now we have gaps.
Now we will have gaps. Should have had that part of the conversation first.
I would say that a liberal use of the mute button will help you with that.
The artificial gap of trying to find the right place to click.
I have a silly question.
Go for it.
So this is as soon as you started talking, this is the first thing that came into my mind, which shows you my mind. I was taken back to, it's like a Psych 101 class study where they gave the monkey, they were feeding 2 different monkeys. They kept them in cages, and one of them they gave like a furry mother, and I think they gave like a metallic mother to the other one.
Yes.
Yeah.
So has anybody, I guess there's like a question of, nobody's done research on what I'm about to say.
I'm so curious where you're going with this.
So when we have VR and full haptic bodysuits, will we be able, what will then be missing? Is it just smell of the other person? Will I be, like, because I'll be able to shake your hand, you'll be able to feel a touch, move around the 3D space. Will that be enough, you think? Will that solve the online education problem? Look, I said it was a crazy question, Sean.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of problems with that haptics.
I'm
So-
sure there is. This is not a great question.
So body
That's why I
movement
didn't ask it until the end.
yeah, body movement versus robotic movement is really different. So human movement versus robotic movement is really different. So when a robot moves, the movement frequency goes from 0 to 100, and then it's like a box. So you go from 0 to 100, and then it's sustained at that, and then it goes down again. Whereas when we move, it actually ramps up slowly and then decreases slowly, and because of the ways our muscles work and all the rest of it. And the C fibers only activate to our touch, which is that ramp up and ramp down, and doesn't to a robotic movement, which is more of a go, stop. And so they would have to come up with haptics, not based on robotic movement, but actually based on our human movement to get those C fibers to activate, which they don't have at the moment, but they'd have to have this very sophisticated ramping up and ramping down like a human movement to get that nice touch to actually work in that environment. But if they could do that, then you would get oxytocin released if you really thought it was a person.
Or a full body haptic suit.
Yeah, if we could get
Brian,
something.
there's
But
something
I don't-
about this that we
it
don't.
could work. It could work.
I love that this episode had foam parties and full body VR haptic suits, including the
We try to
podcast.
hit the whole gamut. No, but it's a really interesting thought, because is the thing that makes the release of oxytocin the movement itself, right? The touch itself, or is it the touch combined with, like you said, the belief that it is from a human? I've had this experience with VR where I've done I forget what they call it, the thing where you're standing on a skyscraper and you look
Yeah,
down and
that's
you
great.
get vertigo, right?
Yeah,
You're standing
absolutely.
on your floor. I did this when I was the chair of computer science at Riverdale. I did this with the kids in the CS courses, and I would actually get I think it was like a 2x6 plank and put it on the floor. The plank experience, that's what it was. And they would actually step up onto the plank in the VR headset. And some of them freaked out because their brain is telling them this is happening, even though you literally know it's not. You're in the same room. But the brain is so powerful. So if you have that touch, is that enough? If it feels like human, if you have the touch combined with the VR simulation, could that be enough? And then would it be, I mean, the same way that we have the dopamine release from the virtual experience versus the serotonin release, would the oxytocin that's released be in the same kind of quality that you would get in a live interaction?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting question. I was involved in a lot of the development of the VR originally because we were using it for, I did a lot of work in rubber hand illusion, where you believe that the rubber hand is actually your body, and then we did a lot of work with the VR.
Oh, those experiments are phenomenal.
Yeah. So I was involved in a lot of the original stuff around that, and actually showing that it was a real perception and so on. And then we took that to another level where we were looking at body dysmorphic disorders such as anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa, and actually changing their perception of their body so that they would then feel as though they were smaller than they are, because they actually perceive themselves as larger than they are. And so that's why they don't want to actually eat, because they actually don't see that they're actually as skinny as they actually are. And so, yeah, we were using neural adaptation, using VR to actually do that. And we showed with the rubber hand illusion, you can get that on VR without having any touch in that case, because our visual system actually overrides. And when you've got movement as well, it actually overrides it. But you can actually get it where you show them that they're being touched, but don't actually touch them. And they actually think they're actually being touched. And all those systems are actively activating to that as well, because we're visually dominant. Our vision actually overrides our other senses. And that's why things like the rubber hand illusion and so on actually work, because your vision is your priority, right? So if you had VR on and you saw someone who you like is there and they were touching you, you probably would get exactly the same response as if they were actually there touching you, because your visual system is such a priority.
So, Brian, the takeaway is go and buy that full body haptic suit.
Yeah, give it a go.
Buy it.
Are you wearing it right now? Is that what you're telling us?
It might be.
This is getting scary.
It's pretty fascinating. I actually have one last question that's closer to home. It makes a ton of sense to me that being in person and the releasing of these chemicals and the things that we've done since the beginning of our species and how we educated each other, enable us to build trust in relationships, right? And those relationships, I've seen it over and over again that just in-person teaching, they're able to leverage something in the relationship to increase motivation in the student. What do you think is that connection between relationship and motivation? Is it me not wanting to let you down? Do you have a sense of that? I know it's a little outside maybe the bounds of what you think about, but I'd be curious if you had a thought about that.
Yeah, no, it is. And I talk a little bit about this whole idea in the book about the fact that we used to be in small groups, and for millions of years, right? We've only been in these huge groups in very recent times, but for millions of years, we've evolved in these small groups where we had to trust everyone within that group. And so if somebody wasn't contributing, if someone was, which is why we really find laziness really disdainful, right? Because you're not contributing enough to our group. So you shouldn't be in our group. And so it has a lot to do with that we're in groups for survival, basically. And so we want to be good contributors to that group. And in a classroom, being a good contributor to that group is actually learning, right? Is actually contributing to the classroom and contributing to what the teacher actually wants us to do, because they hopefully are the leader of that group. And so that's really important to us. And we don't want that person to feel as though we're being lazy. And we remember people, right? I remember people from my childhood who were lazy, right? Or people from, who did something that the group didn't want them to do, or did something against the group. And you remember that forever because it's so important to us. So I think that's why motivation occurs when you're inside those groups, and that's inside the classroom, and the classroom's a really solid group and everyone is connected. Nobody wants to let anyone else down, because that's the way our brains have evolved, right? And that's why it is so motivating for us to do the right thing inside the group, and not do the right thing when we're not inside the group, right? If you don't feel as though you're part of that class, then you're going to have your arms folded, and you're going to be like, I'm not going to do what you say, teacher, because I'm not part of your group, and I don't want your group to do well. I want my group to do well. Who's mate beside me?
I love that. My daughter's in a new school, and I've seen that reaction. I've seen that go both ways. It's an online school, and watching her classes, I'm seeing a very different level of ability in the teachers to create that cohesive unit in a very short amount of time. But putting it in that context of the group dynamic that's really interesting. I hadn't ever thought of it that way. Very cool. Mark, this is just so interesting. What a great conversation. And I love that we went from in-person meetings to full haptic bodysuits and all of that in just a little bit of time here. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. Again, congratulations on the book. We'll put the link in the episode notes, of course, as well as some of the research that you've mentioned. We're going to send a link out also to Brian's full body haptic suit, just so that people can get the same one and interact with Brian.
Get on board.
We're all going to have one sooner or later, so we might as well do it now. But really, thank you so much for taking the time here. I think people are really going to enjoy hearing how you're thinking about this stuff, and it's just been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Brian. It's been great chatting to both of you. It's been awesome.
Thank you for telling me to adjust my camera.
No worries, Brian.
Thank you so much for talking with us. This is great. This one was fun.
Thank you.
All right, folks. So that's all for now. Thanks so much for listening, and always keep learning. Did you learn something just now? Get the full episode of Ways We Learn wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, we'd love to get your rating or review.